A potential political shake-up in Ireland. Opinion polls say the Irish are shifting away from the two main parties towards Sinn Fein. So how might this affect the next government? And could it redefine Ireland's politics? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finnegan. Ireland's governments have long been dominated by two centre-right parties. Fine Gael, that's the party of current Prime Minister Leo Varadkar, and Fina Fall. But this appears to be changing. Opinion polls show Sinn Fein is now the most popular party and Varadkar is in third place. It means he might not be able to secure a third successive term. And Saturday's general election could produce a parliament where neither of the main parties has a majority. That opens the door to Sinn Fein playing a major role in any future government. Al Jazeera's Niamh Barker reports from Dublin.
For the past 9 years, the Fine Gael government, led by Prime Minister Leo Varadkar, has presided over a period of cultural change. Now, abortion is legal and so is same-sex marriage in this traditionally Catholic country. But Leo Varadkar's also been accused of missing the mark when it comes to dealing with key issues like homelessness, healthcare and housing. And now, for the first time in Ireland's modern political history, it looks as if there could be a shift away from these centrist parties to the left-wing Sinn Fein party. During 30 years of violence in Northern Ireland, a period known simply as the Troubles, in which 3,500 people died, Sinn Fein were regarded as being the political wing of the paramilitary group, the IRA. The party now says those old distinctions no longer apply and have set tackling some of Ireland's biggest problems at the heart of the party's campaign. Sinn Fein also want to hold a referendum on unifying Ireland within 5 years, something that the centrist parties say is too soon, a referendum that could have a destabilising factor on the whole of the island of Ireland. No single party is expected to win this election outright. Coalition building is inevitable. The question is whether these parties can work together to form a stable government. Niamh Barker for Inside Story.
Well, here's a look at some of the main campaign themes in this election. In a recent poll, voters said that healthcare was their top priority. Hospitals are facing staffing shortages and are struggling to meet demand. Waiting times to see a doctor and for hospital beds have tripled. Ireland's also experiencing one of the most acute housing crises in Europe. In the capital, Dublin, rents have doubled over the past decade. 6,000 children are homeless. Gross domestic product has soared, but so too have tax bills, and many people have been angered by government plans to extend the age that they can receive a state pension by 2 years to 68 by the year 2028. All right, let's bring in our guests for today's discussion. We're joined by Owen O'Malley, who's an Associate Professor in Political Science at Dublin City University School of Law and Government. He joins us via Skype from Cadiz in Spain. From Dublin, we're joined by Declan de Bredún, a political columnist and author of Power Play, The Rise of Modern Sinn Féin. And from Newcastle in England, we're joined by Conal Parr, a lecturer in history at Northumbria University and an expert in Irish affairs. Gentlemen, welcome to Inside Story. Owen, let's start with you. If the polls are right and Sinn Féin does well, will Fina Fall go into government with Sinn Féin as a coalition partner? I mean, if those polls translate into seats for Sinn Féin, who else could Fina Fall form a government with? I mean, could it?
They say they won't go in, and I think the leader of Fina Fall, Micheál Martin, is sincere in saying, when he says that he won't go into government with Sinn Féin. It'll probably take a couple of days before we know how the votes are actually translated into seats. And it's only then that we'll really see what options are open. Fianna Fáil would prefer to form a coalition government with the Green Party, the Labour Party and the Social Democrats, those sort of centre-left parties. They may not be able to do that. It's quite probable, in fact, that they won't have the numbers. And it's possible then that a Fianna Fáil Sinn Féin coalition might be one that is a possibility. When in the past, when parties have said they'd never go into government with other people, very often they immediately do so. It'll take a bit of work. It'll certainly take a bit of work because both parties, both Sinn Fein and Fina Fall, have to pass through a party conference to allow their leaders to go into coalition, and it won't be easy for either Sinn Fein or Fina Fall to do something like this. Because it's hard, it won't happen.
You mentioned Michael Martin, of course, a fierce critic of Sinn Fein, but let's face it. I mean, this is possibly his final chance to become Prime Minister, Taoiseach. But I mean, he's not really going to turn away from that if Sinn Fein is key to him becoming the leader, is he?
No, and he can't. I mean, there's nobody else there to become leader. Very few people make it all the way through politics, get offered the job of Taoiseach or Prime Minister, and then say no to it. So my suspicion is that while it would be difficult for both sides, for both Fina Fall and for Sinn Fein to do this, if the numbers made it such that it was really the only viable option, I suspect that they would do it.
Declan, would Fina Fall enter into a grand coalition with Fine Gael? I mean, their rivalry dates back to the Civil War. Policy-wise, there's not much between them, or is that a political impossibility?
I don't think it's an impossibility. I think it's highly unlikely. I mean, it would be, I don't know, it would be like Celtic and Rangers, Glasgow Celtic forming one football team, you know. It's just, it goes back so far, and it's tied in with old class divisions, you know, and it's such a tradition, especially with the centenary of the Civil War coming up and what they did to each other at that time, their supporters. So I don't see it as it's a theoretical possibility. I think it's highly unlikely. Also, it would not find favour with the establishment, the financial establishment, for example, because they would be very unenthusiastic about Sinn Fein becoming the main party of opposition and the alternative government.
So what do you think is going to happen? Who will Fina Fall go into coalition with?
I think at the moment, I think the strongest possibility is that they will have enough seats to form an alliance with the Green Party, the Labour Party and independents. There were a lot of independents. There will probably be about 16 or 17 out of 160 in the new Dáil Parliament. So I think it will be possible, but maybe difficult, to form a clear majority. Another option would be to have a minority government, which would be tolerated by Fine Gael in opposition. In other words, a reenactment of what we've had for the last few years, but with the roles reversed, where this time Fine Gael would be in opposition and Fianna Fáil would be in government instead of the other way around.
Conall, Sinn Féin's current leadership is from the peace process generation. Why do the mainstream parties in Ireland still regard them as toxic? Will they ever be able to shake off their baggage?
It'll be very difficult. I think part of the difficulty is one of the reasons why Sinn Féin replaced Gerry Adams with Mary Lou McDonald was to lose this tag and lose this association of the past. But these objections are actually very much based on the present and what kind of a government Sinn Féin might be involved with. So if Sinn Féin has some decision-making or power around courts, around policing, given their ambivalent attitude towards what is the Special Criminal Court, and also in terms of other general legal matters, you're still dealing very much with a party which has these associations. And what the spirit which has haunted this election is of a young man named Paul Quinn, who was killed, who was lured to a farm. He was from Armagh, but he was lured to a farm in County Monaghan on the 20th of October in 2007. Which, by the way, was a time when the executive in the Northern Ireland, in the Northern Ireland Assembly, had been back up and running, and this young man was killed by people associated with the IRA, which is the armed wing of Sinn Féin. And so, therefore, this is actually very much about the present as well, and about the kind of decisions that Sinn Féin would be around and able to influence.
All right, so Conal, how do you explain the popularity of Sinn Fein with voters in the south?
It's to do with that young generation of voters. I actually think it's quite a global thing in some ways, and certainly in a European context. You're dealing with a generation of people who know that they will be poorer than their parents. As you alluded to earlier in your program, essentially those parties for the last 90 years, the largest two Irish parties, Fina Fall and Fine Gael, have flipped and alternated in power. And it's regarded, so the implication is that it's Fina Fáil's turn now. And a lot of people have said, well, last time Fina Fáil were in power, they didn't make such a good job of it. And we actually don't feel that we are a wealthy country, small European country. We feel that we are actually our access to health, to housing especially, which tends to be very expensive, is not being built and is not very good. We're not actually going to put up with this. And actually, we would like a change. We would like something different. The final thing I wanted to add to this was, don't underestimate the referenda, the two referendums that were passed in 2015 for same-sex marriage, marriage equality, and also in 2018 for abortion rights. Essentially, what that Sinn Féin were involved in both of those, though, of course, there was a large coalition of parties and interests and activists. But what those votes showed was that there's a younger generation of people who, if you get them involved in politics, can enact real change at the ballot box and influence the politics of Ireland in a very profound way.
Oh, and I don't want the whole of our discussion here to be about Sinn Féin, but there are a couple of more questions I want to ask here. What would Sinn Féin in government, if it came to that, mean for a united Ireland? How far apart on the issue are Fina Fall and Sinn Féin?
They're not quite as far apart as, insofar as that they're both in favour of a united Ireland. All of the parties and the vast majority of people are in favour of a united Ireland and will say that they are in favour of a united Ireland. They will differ quite profoundly, though, on the speed at which that happens and the way in which it happens. Sinn Féin seem to be moving it towards a position where they're almost post-Good Friday Agreement. That was the settlement in 1998 between the parties, the two parts of Northern Ireland, the two communities in Northern Ireland, in which both sides said that they'd give each other almost a mutual veto. Sinn Féin are moving to a position where they just think that if we can get 50% plus one of the voters in Northern Ireland to say that we will have a united Ireland, they would be in favour of that. Most of the other parties in the Republic of Ireland would be wary of that way in which of achieving a united Ireland and want to bring the Unionist and Protestant communities along with them rather than just outvote them or outbreed them.
I suppose the issue is the timing. I mean, is there anything in Fina Fáil's manifesto about a referendum that would preclude them doing any sort of deal with Sinn Féin on it?
No, and a lot of Fina Fáilers would kind of viscerally would share a lot of Sinn Féin's position on the north. The thing about it is that Sinn Féin continually called for a border poll, but it's not in the gift of the Irish government. It is the UK Secretary of State for Northern Ireland that can say when a border poll happens, and so it won't really affect it. Who's in government as such. Okay. Certainly Sinn Féin, if they were in government in the Republic of Ireland, could push a UK Secretary of State towards this, but they're not going to be moved unless there's a real sense that this is a time where maybe a good bit more than 50% would definitely go for it. Sinn Féin probably also don't really want, I mean, it's something that is easy to ask for. And it's good when they're refused, because they can say, oh, we've been asking for a border poll. Look at us. We're interested in united Ireland. The rest of them don't seem to care. But a border poll might be something that they don't actually want, because it's not certain what the outcome would be. And if they were to get a border poll and lose it, that would push off the prospect of a united Ireland by years, if not decades.
OK, Declan, you spoke about Fina Fall possibly managing to pull together a coalition that doesn't involve Sinn Féin. How stable a government would that be? And one last question on Sinn Féin. Could Sinn Féin pull together some sort of coalition with left-wing parties and independents. Is that even mathematically impossible? And what sort of government would that be?
Well, the outgoing government was only expected to last 6 months, but in fact it lasted about 3.5 years. So sometimes shaky coalitions actually last longer than people predict at the time. So I think Fina Fall could do that and could keep that kind of mix-em, gather-em coalition together for a few years. As for Sinn Fein, unfortunately for them, they haven't run enough candidates to win the number of seats that they could have won otherwise. In other words, they've only 42 candidates, whereas Fina Fall have 84. And I think, like everybody else, they were not expecting to be doing so well in the polls. Now, in theory, on a very good day for Sinn Fein, they could maybe cobble together something. I think it's highly unlikely, and I think it probably wouldn't last very long. But I think definitely they're going to be a major force in the next Parliament.
Conall, why hasn't the far right managed to gain any sort of foothold in Ireland? How do you explain this wave of popularism that we've seen elsewhere being almost completely absent in Ireland?
Well, sometimes it's said that when populism occurs in Ireland, it actually tacks more towards the left than the right. And I think there probably has been a slight leftward shift in the population. If not, I don't think that that's going to be the nucleus of a new government at all necessarily. But at the same time, there's no question that there's been a little bit of that in a reaction against those two larger centre-right parties. I think you should be aware that there are some right-wing elements and certainly quite voluble populist individuals who are former journalists and other figures who are quite prominent on social media and so on. And one of them is running. There's actually a man named Peter Casey who's running in two different constituencies down south and then up north in Ulster and Donegal as well. So there are. So he wouldn't describe Casey as far right, but he's that kind of populist figure for sure, given comments he's made about the travelling community in Ireland. So I think that those elements are there, but there's probably an argument to say that Fina Fall and Fine Gael have enough of a conservative agenda to be able to sweep up some of those elements, and probably similar to what happens in the UK with the Conservative Party, see them off. And also, don't forget in this question that also the effect of Brexit, which, it hasn't been discussed so much. It's not actually been a Brexit election. There's a sort of bipartisan credence and respect that people have expressed towards Leo Varadkar for how he's handled Brexit. So it's not been a case of that, and it's actually sort of unified the country to some extent. This election has been about something very different. It has been about local issues. It has been about housing, healthcare, childcare.
Owen, picking up on something that Conall said right back at the start of that answer there, Ireland's pretty unique in that there's traditionally been no swing towards the left or right in from election to election, but with Sinn Fein on the rise, is that about to change? Will the left now become a mainstream political force in Irish politics?
Yeah, one might argue that Sinn Fein, while it espouses a lot of left-wing political policies, it's not actually a left-wing party. It's primarily a nationalist party whose ultimate goal is the United Ireland, and anything else it's interested in vaguely left-wing policies, but it's not a kind of an ideological or doctrinaire left-wing party. It's going to be quite a pragmatic party, and you could make a comparison to actually Fina Fall, that dominant party in the 1930s, which came in at a time when everybody was scared of it. There were kind of people talking about, have they still got guns and under their coats? And what it did was it came in and it had quite a radical social program of house building. And so in many ways, Sinn Fein might be a replica of Fina Fall in the 1930s, which would be pragmatic, progressive, but not ideological in any way. And so we might be seeing a move to a left-right divide in Irish politics, but it actually could be a continuance of pragmatic parties doing well, which is, I think, a lot of people seem to be afraid of Sinn Fein if they were to get into government. My suspicion is that they won't be quite as bad as many people fear, and they certainly won't be as good as a lot of other people hope.
Declan, is it too early to write off Fine Gael electorally now?
Well, I think they're going to have a bad time in this election, but I mean, they will come back. I mean, there is a base there, you know, and they're still quite popular with the middle classes. As I say, they're going to have a bad time. They've been in government for 9 years, and there's still a lot of problems with the health system and housing and so on. And well, I don't really expect the incoming government to perform much better than the outgoing one, but people just get tired of government after 9 years, and they decide to take a risk on the opposition.
So this is electoral fatigue, really, or fatigue with the incoming incumbent government. It's nothing to do with the politics.
Well, it's you know, the Sinn Fein in particular have some really excellent spokespersons. There's a member called Pierce Doherty from Donegal in the northwest, who is a very clever and very eloquent speaker on taxation and other such issues, and he's very impressive. Also, a gentleman called Owen O'Brien, who's based in Dublin, who has been very vocal on housing and has even written a book about the housing shortage, and he's a very articulate spokesperson as well. Mary Lou MacDonald, the party leader, is also very eloquent and a very good performer on television. So the talent bank on the other side of the house isn't that great. So that's one of the reasons Sinn Fein are doing so well.
Conall, we've got about a minute and a half left on the programme. As you said, Brexit hasn't been much of an issue in this election campaign, but Ireland's political and economic significance is about to change dramatically now, isn't it? With it being the sole English-speaking bridge between the EU and North America.
Yes, for sure. And it's very interesting, that relationship generally, the kind of, does Ireland tack more to Europe or does it look more to the United States? And Ireland is sometimes between those two things, but it also has a very prominent relationship with the UK and the sort of Anglo-Irish relations, though, you know, have been a huge part of the country's history and a part of its ongoing identity to a degree, the interaction between these islands, as we say. So it's going to be very interesting to how that pans out. And I think that, you know, I also do appreciate that it's becoming more of a left-right. If it does become more of left-right politics, I do agree with the point made earlier that actually, you know, Sinn Fein probably similar to the SNP uses left-wing rhetoric now and then to become popular, and actually becomes quite realist when they're in government, as they've proven in the north. So It's going to be very interesting to see if that left-right normalcy actually develops in Ireland.
Gentlemen, we shall find out in time. Many thanks indeed to all of you for being with us. Owen O'Malley, Declan de Braden and Conall Parr. And thank you for watching. Don't forget you can see the programme again at any time just by going to our website. You'll find that at aljazeera.com. For further discussion about Ireland, join us on our Facebook page. You'll find that at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle @AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finnegan, and the whole team here in Doha. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you again. Bye for now.